My name is Courtnie Bagley. I've been at the Texas Public Policy Foundation for 2 years now. I think it was actually this time 2 years ago that I started the interview process. So I taught high school for 20 years. I worked on several campaigns here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. The first campaign that I worked for was Life Powered, and I promoted energy education around the state, affordable, reliable energy, and why we should be really proud as Texans for all of the natural resources that we have. We're branching out, and we are now incorporating Texas history and civics education, and we're working with the State Board of Education on curriculum and education standards, and just next month we will be launching a new website, and our website is called Teaching Texas, and we are going to be putting some great lesson plans out there for teachers to utilize on energy, civics, and Texas history, because we have so many things to be proud of, and we want our students to know all of the great things that we're doing here. Also, I worked a little bit on the parent empowerment campaign last year, sharing the story of my 4 boys who went through the public school system. So, and I gotta say, because we're doing the Texas panel, I am a 7th generation Texan, and my sons are 4th generation Aggies. So I'm not sure we get more Texan than that. I want to introduce our panelists right now. We have an amazing group here, and I'm so glad you joined us, because this really is, to me, the most important panel that we have at TPS. And the reason is because understanding our history informs our culture and our values. And as new people are moving into our state, we want to share with them all of the amazing things that Texas offers, and we want them to understand the reason why they came here. From a distance, they know Texas is amazing, but they don't really understand why. And so that's what we're going to talk about here in the next few minutes. I want to introduce first J.P. Bryan. By the way, did y'all notice we're all color coordinated this morning? We did not plan this, but I think we're looking pretty good. J.P. Bryan is a native Texan and a descendant of Stephen F. Austin. He's been involved in energy and investment industries for more than 5 decades. He began his career in investment banking at organizations like J.P. Morgan, Dominick & Dominick, the Mortgage Bank, and Southwest Region. J.P. has also devoted much of his life to his passion for historic preservation. He's been the president of the Texas Historical Foundation and the Texas State Historical Association, and he was appointed by Governor George Bush as the commissioner for the Texas Historical Commission. But that's not all. He has also written numerous booklets and book introductions, including one on the history of Lonesome Dove, which that sounds really fascinating to me, and another about artist Tom Lee. Just recently, after years of extensive research, JP submitted his book for publication concerning the Texas Revolution and the Battle of San Jacinto. Dr. Don Frazier is the director of the Texas Center at Schreiner University in Kerrville. He is a graduate of the University of Texas Arlington and Texas Christian University, and the award-winning author of 6 books. When he is not teaching in college classrooms, Dr. Frazier is very involved in public history, and he's worked on Civil War, frontier heritage trails in Texas, New Mexico, and Louisiana, and he's also worked on historical projects in Europe and Mexico. Dr. Frazier is an elected member of the prestigious Philosophical Society of Texas, the oldest learned organization in the state, a fellow of the Texas State Historical Association, and a director scholar on the board of the Texas Historical Foundation. Most recently, Dr. Frazier was appointed by Greg Abbott to serve on the advisory committee for the Texas 1836 project. We also have Dr. Kate Rogers, who is the executive director of the Alamo Trust, the nonprofit organization responsible for the daily operations of the historical Alamo site and the implementation of a really exciting project, a $550 million renovation to the Alamo. And if you haven't been down there lately, it's pretty amazing. During her tenure at the Trust, Kate has successfully kicked off statewide fundraising with nearly $50 million raised in private funding. She has been named Woman of the Year by the San Antonio Business Journal, and she is also one of the top 100 Texans to watch. Dr. Rogers graduated magna cum laude with her Bachelor of Science degree from Texas Christian University, and she received her master's degree at the University of Texas at Austin. She recently earned her Doctor of Education degree from the University of Southern California. So that's the introduction to our panelists. These really are the most prolific Texas history representatives that we could have here today, so I'm really excited. What we're going to do for the first 40 minutes is I'm going to go through and ask questions of our panelists, and I'm going to ask them to keep their answers short. We could be here literally all day long. This is my favorite thing to talk about, but we're going to have to keep it short. So I'm going to do a Q&A with the panelists, and then for our last 20 minutes, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions of them as well. So let's begin. And Dr. Frazier, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us about the Texas Center, some of the new projects that you're doing, what the history of the center is, and what the mission of the center is?
Sure. We stood up the Texas Center 4 years ago. So 1st of June 2020, right at the height of COVID. And the idea was that Schreiner wanted to become the university in the state of Texas that embraced that Texas identity. At the exact time in this state when so many institutions of higher learning are fleeing away from that Texas identity as being way too parochial, Schreiner said, hey, if y'all don't want it, we'll take it and we'll run with it. And so that's what we're doing. The question is, what exactly does it mean to be a Texas Center? So we spent the first couple of years figuring out what the big conversations were across the state. JP's been by, worked with Kate down at the Alamo. And we've had a chance to go all over the state and figure out that not everybody agrees on what the Texas story is. And in fact, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of experts on Texas that know nothing about Texas. And so that's essentially what we're going to try to do is we're in the stamping out ignorance business. So what we're going to do, in order to get that done, we're going to build a 250 video series, 5 minutes at a throw, that we call E Pluribus Texas. Out of many, one Texas. I know it's bad Latin, but still, you get the idea. And we're hoping to be able to pump that video series into the K through 16 space. So that's what we're doing in 2024.
And just to follow up on that, what is the meaning of being a Texan? What is the value that you want to share with people across the state?
Sure. It's important to be from some place. We're not Iowa. We're not Wisconsin. So let's go ahead and start with that as the baseline. All right, so if we're from someplace, what does that mean? Well, we're actually the heirs of two very, very important political theories. One is the spirit of 1776. I argue that all those people in the powdered wigs that formed this nation that we live in were all Texans. They just hadn't met the place yet. But I think that their policies and what they had in mind is actually in operation within this state. The other great political tradition that we're heirs to is the tradition of the Grito de Dolores. In 1810, Miguel Hidalgo finally just said, look, we've had it. We've had it, and we're not going to take it anymore. And here's how he summed it up. Death to bad government. So that's the thing I like about that sort of Mexican practicality. They just cut right to the chase. Up in Philadelphia, they're holding truths to be self-evident, blah, blah, blah. You get down to Dolores, says, hey, death to bad government, we're done. And so by the time you take that Grito de Dolores and the Philadelphia combo together, you've got Texas. And we're self-reliant. We'll handle it ourselves. We don't like other people telling us how to do it or how they did it back in New York or California. We've got our own ways of doing it, and we welcome everybody to put their hand to the task, but don't push us off the task and then take the task away from us. So,
I love that. You mentioned that y'all are working on a museum, and you said that Mr. Bryan has been there, and I know that museums are a particular interest to you. And I'm sure that has to do with your personal family legacy. So can you talk to us for a second about that and how your interest in museums and preserving Texas history came to be?
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Don, for that introduction and all of you for being here today to hear about our history. But yeah, my interest in having a museum came from my infatuation with the history of the great state of Texas, and especially the Western settlement and the role Texas played in that. If you look at the settlement of the West, on that landscape over a period of about 400 years, the history played out, and that place is like none other in all human time. It actually, people ask the question, well, where is the West? The West starts at the 98th parallel, which runs right through the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, Texas. In the western part of the United States, as you know, it extends all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It's divided on the south by the Gulf of Mexico, in a line that runs to El Paso and then straight to California, and on the north by Canada. And think about this. After 700 years of western migration from Europe to the East Coast, for the first time when those settlers emerged on the 98th parallel, they beheld in front of them these incredible long and short grass prairies, punctuated by some of the most beautiful mountains in the world. There are great historians such as Walter Prescott Webb who said that view changed those people's view not just of the landscape, but of themselves. And they saw opportunity as not limited as it would have been in a forested country, but as unlimited. And you see that in the history that was acted out upon this place. And the centerpiece of that was a place we call Texas. And we have, in my judgment, the most remarkable history of any state in the United States. And we live in the greatest country in the world, in the greatest state in that country, and it is endowed by the freedoms that came from our Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and our Bill of Rights. And it proved once and for all in the western part of this United States that those documents could travel. From 1820 to 1920, under the foundational freedoms embedded in those documents, the western part of the United States produced the fourth largest GNP in the world. And it proved that small government and big people, what they could accomplish without government regulation or oversight. And what we have done in this country and in this state is endow our citizens with the greatest freedoms of any nation in the world. And I will tell you that that history that exemplifies or expresses what we accomplished is now under attack. And we need to stand up for it, because that history should be a source of inspiration and a source for righteous conduct by all our people. And those people that say Texas history isn't inspiring, then I tell them, you know what? You need to find another job.
You know, Mr. Bryan, when you're telling that story, I'm thinking about the people that came here back in the 1800s. You know, some of them literally pushing their carts and walking to Texas from places like Mississippi. I know that's the story in my family of my ancestors. It was a hard life, and you had to be committed to something in order to stay here and to build a life here. And I don't think there is a story that exemplifies that more than what happened at the Alamo. I mean, you talk about people, when you read the history of these people that came here, some of them really were on their last leg looking for something to be inspired by. And I know that's something that you've taken on with your renovations and all of the things that you're doing there at the Alamo. Can you tell us? I mean, there's a fabulous video that I've watched several times that tells the story of the process, but I would love for you just to give an overview right now of what y'all are doing.
Sure. Thank you, Courtney, and thank you all for being here this morning. Don spoke quite eloquently about the Texas identity, and in my view, that started at the Alamo. And it was exemplified and came to life in the 189 men who defended that site back in 1836. We just celebrated the 188th commemoration of the battle. And unfortunately, we all take great pride in the Alamo. San Antonio is known as Alamo City. We are still usually the #1 visited attraction in the state of Texas. But sometimes people come and they say things like, "Is that it?" Or "I thought it would be much bigger." And they don't understand why this place, Don also spoke about the power of place and why this place matters so much to us as Texans. And so we need for them to understand. We also need them to understand the complexity of the Alamo's history, right? Because there was a lot that led up to the battle. Sometimes we want to pull the 13 days of the siege out of history and separate it from its context. But Don also spoke about the Mexican Revolution, which was an important part of our history. You think about the 7 flags that have flown over Texas during our history, like 6 flags. Sorry, Don.
It's probably about 13, Kate. You're in good shape.
We have a new
We
one.
can
I
always
added
throw
one
in
more.
another flag.
Yeah, always
Yeah.
throwing another flag.
But I think that what we're trying to do is to make people understand why this place matters so much, so they walk away with a truly world-class experience where they've learned a great deal that they didn't know coming into it about the story, about what happened at that place, and about what happened before and about what happened after. So we're building several new facilities. Mostly it's an adaptive reuse. So I think people sometimes has reservation about, well, what are you building that will sort of diminish the power of the church itself. Everything that we're doing is utilizing existing structures that are already within the historic district. So it's mostly about repurposing them to accommodate what they're being called to do today. So, for example, one of the projects that's under construction now is the Texas Cavaliers Education Center, a place that I'm very excited about because, like you at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, like what JP has already done to a great extent, we want to spread the story of the Alamo to our school children far and wide. We get about 140,000 school-aged children at the Alamo each and every year. Once the center opens, we expect that will grow to more like 250,000. We'll also have a distance learning studio so we can bring the story to children throughout Texas, but also beyond Texas, and maybe even internationally, people who have an interest in Texas history. Because when you go anywhere in the world, right, and you say you're from Texas, people go, "Oh, the Alamo," right? That's what they know. So sometimes it's interesting to me that sometimes the fascination with this place or the understanding of it can be deepest even outside of our country. And so we have work to do to make people understand and appreciate why it matters so much. And as JP said, we have an obligation to protect that heritage.
Yeah. I think there's something that each of you have touched on, and that is how, I guess, our history is sort of being hijacked. And the stories are not being told, or there's the possibility that the stories won't be told the way they should be in the future. And I know that the 1836 project was put into legislation by the governor to preserve history the way it should be preserved. But can you talk about, because I think one of the things each of you have touched on is that these histories are hard. So how do we tell these hard histories truthfully and yet still maintain the pride that we have for our country and for our state in particular? And what is the goal of the 1836 project in helping to facilitate that?
Great, yeah. The short answer is if we just tell our history honestly, and if you can emerge from that unmoved and uninspired, then maybe you do have a home in Iowa. Because it's an amazing story, even with all of the high points and the low points. You know, you think about it, we are not who we were, as individuals, at 14. My gosh, at age 14, I would have been on a no-fly list. So, you know, you grow past these sorts of points in your narrative arc. But the fact that the government of this state decided that it was important enough that this was finally getting to a kind of a crisis point, or certainly an inflection point, that we needed a law passed that would form a committee to talk about the Texas identity, the Texas story, broadly across the entire state, I think is telling. Because, frankly, many of our flagship institutions and our leading organizations have failed in that task. And, you know, you think about all the publicly supported institutions in this state, and then all of a sudden you think about what the messaging is that's coming from those publicly supported institutions, and it's kind of staggering. And the idea is that, you know, if we're going to actually reach some sort of consensus, we don't all have to agree, but we kind of need to agree that there is this story that's worth knowing. And so the 1836 committee is really just about that, and being able to amplify things like what's going on at the Alamo, what's going on at the Bryan Museum in Galveston, what's going on with the TSHA, what's going on at the African American Museum of Dallas. I can tell you from driving all over this state, and it's a really big state, newsflash. Next time I form the Texas Center, I'm going to form the Rhode Island Center. You know, it's much more compact story. But what I can tell you is that people in Borger and Amarillo don't know what's going on in Brownsville and McAllen. People in Jefferson have no idea where El Paso is. On their map, it just says Terra Incognita. So something that is kind of binding all that together and trying to build at least some sort of agreement. Hey, we're all lucky to be here. Now, you can take whatever variation off of that thesis that you want, but let's all agree that Texas has a very optimistic story. It's not all doom and gloom. It's not all a long litany of our crimes. This is actually a great human saga that should be an inspiration for the entire rest of the nation. So if we get it right in Texas, the United States will be better off. If the United States is better off, the whole world will be better off. So that's what's at stake. And the lawmakers saw that. And so now it's our job to get out there in and amongst the folks and see what's going on. We report to the governor every other year, kind of what we found. We invite people to come testify to the committee so we can hear it from their own voices, what they're up to. And ultimately, we'll be the guys that know just about more than anybody else in the state what's going on in every corner of this state when it comes to telling the Texas story. It's a big task.
And Dr. Rogers, y'all have taken on the hard history at the Alamo with the renovation at the Woolworth building. Can you tell us about that?
Well, John knows this because he's got a front row seat for a lot of the things that go on at the Alamo. And the truth is the battle rages on, right? So, you know, we have, I think what has always made the Alamo site, people ask, is it the Alamo plan that we're in the midst of, right, of building this world-class visitor center museum has been talked about for as long as I've been alive. And people frequently ask me, which is a long time, so people frequently ask me, why has this never been able to get done? And the truth of it is because the site is co-owned by the city of San Antonio and the state of Texas. And getting the city of San Antonio and the state of Texas to see eye to eye about what should happen at the Alamo is not an easy task. And so to this day, we still have legacy groups We had the Alamo Citizens Advisory Committee that was appointed by the city council members of San Antonio. That was back when the prior plan was advanced, that went before the Texas Historical Commission and was not approved. And so we have that legacy. Some of those folks are still around. We have a museum planning committee that Don is a part of. And we do our best to listen. We really do. And to understand the multiple perspectives that people have. But Don said it best, at the end of the day, there is one history. There are not versions of history, right? There are things that happened that we know they happened because of primary source documentation. And so our job is to rely on what we know. And, you know, when people want to interject things that are not factual, sometimes we have to challenge that, and that makes people upset. And, you know, representations. I mean, we have a debate going on right now because in the lobby of the new, look, there's many wins here, right, at the Alamo. We're going to have vignettes, statues in the lobby that talk about the full 300 years of history, featuring real people who we know have a tie to the site, starting with the indigenous people who once lived there, and moving all the way up to the preservation era with Clara Driscoll and Idina de Zavala. But there's one vignette that features William B. Travis, the colonel at the Alamo, and Joe, who was the enslaved person he brought with him. In my view, there are many visitors who come to the Alamo every year who don't know that William B. Travis brought an enslaved person with him, right? So that's to me an enlightening moment right there. But we have some people who are upset because in the vignette, Joe is holding a weapon. Because what we know from the historical record is that Joe brought his gun. When William B. Travis, when the Mexicans stormed the walls, and William B. Travis grabbed his gun and said, "Let's go, boys," Joe went with them, with his weapon. But there are people who are upset that he's holding a weapon. And so, you know, it's things like that it doesn't, you know, we're gonna continue to, each and every day, sort of have to, work our way through. And like I said, we try to give folks a seat at the table. The civil rights exhibit, I think, is a big win. You know, it's in the place where the lunch counter once stood. To the extent that this is a story of freedom, independence and freedom is the essence of what the Alamo story is about. And that has taken many shapes throughout our country's history, right? So we're not going to shy away from those. And the fact that lunch counter was a part of the civil rights movement in San Antonio, we will honor that because you can still see where that lunch counter stood. I consider that, you know, to be a tribute to that part of our history. But even that doesn't satisfy everybody.
Travis has nothing on you. I have seen you hold the line against long odds. I've only heard of Travis. I've seen you do it.
Thank you, Don. Thank you,
Mr.
Don.
Bryan, can you tell us what the Texas Historical Association is doing along with or in addition to the work that's being done at the Texas Center and at the Alamo, and what your role is in that and what your hopes are for that organization?
Sure. Well, it for the last year and a half, it's been simply to return the organization to its original configuration between academic and non-academic. Our board had become quite out of compliance with our bylaws, and the same problem existed with the various committees, of which there are 36. We have an enormous impact on the narrative, the historical narrative of Texas history. Through all our outreach programs, we publish books on Texas under our own title. We publish the Quarterly, which is a quarterly, as you all know, scholarly compendium. And then we publish the Handbook of Texas, which gets almost 1 million hits online. So a lot of people are searching for answers to questions about Texas history, and we're glad to provide those answers for them. And then we publish the Texas Almanac. And plus, we sponsor Texas History Day, which I think is one of our most seminal and important outreaches because it touches 70,000 children across the state of Texas who participate. and learn history and learn why our history is important and why they should be proud to be Texans. And then they come to Austin and participate in the finals. This year we're going to have a 14% increase in those participants. There'll be 948 kids that will come here with their families, and then those that succeed will go on to National History Day in Washington, which for these kids from small towns is a wonderful experience in their lives. And so that and our other outreach is just to ensure the protection and promotion of our history. Because the thing that is worrisome to me is who's going to be telling our stories in the future. And if you look at the academic community today and look at the history departments across this country, not just in our own state, but the history departments, if we can use the terms conservative and liberal, are dominated by a more liberal narrative. As a matter of fact, it's almost impossible to find a conservative in most of our major history departments today. So unfortunately, who's going to tell the stories that will result in that honest debate between both ideas? We need to hear from both sides of the spectrum, but we have to have that debate so that we can come up with the truth. And that is what we all should be seeking, not some distortion of the truth to make a point or a preconceived notion or a conclusion we don't want to arrive at after the fact. You can read a lot of these narratives. You don't even need to see it or read it. You know what the conclusion is going to be because of who wrote it. They already know the answer they want, and it's not always the truthful answer. And it's not the answer that really commemorates and memorializes, but also involves a natural inquiry and critique that should go with any historical evaluation. We're not trying to promote somebody that doesn't deserve the accolades, but you tell me from your own experience, who in this room is perfect? We all have our flaws, but the question is, what did we do heroic in our lives that are important that other people should gain inspiration from that? It could be just one event, but it could be mostly a lifetime of having lived in a way that's inspiring. And that's the message we need to get to children today. We have a museum. We started it mainly to talk about the settlement of the West in Texas and its role in that. And it's a great story, but we realized that what we were missing, we weren't educating the children. So we've now transformed ourselves into an educational institution trying to reach these children. Because if you ask a group of children to come to visit you and it's in a history environment, ask them, what do you think of history? In unison, they'll say, it is boring. So that's what we have to overcome. And we have to overcome it by showing them that there's interest in, and importantly, from history, you can learn and live your life. You don't have to make the mistakes. You can learn it from history. Or you can live and learn. You can just go on and live your life, ignore history, and suffer from all the mistakes and miss the opportunities. We have got to get that message to children. History is being diminished at every institution in the United States today because of STEM. But history sits on the top, in my judgment, of all the other educational disciplines because it's the only one, let's say, that will allow you to examine your own profession, whether it be a lawyer or a doctor, and see how you could be a better lawyer or doctor. It won't make you one, but I assure you it'll make you a better one.
Courtnie, if I could just add to what JP is stating right now, I do think that if you broaden out just from history and take social studies more broadly, right? So social studies as a part of the school curriculum has been squeezed out over years. It's not a tested subject in the early grades. Even when you get into middle school, frequently you'll find teachers who have no background in the topic they're teaching, be that Texas history or U.S. history, because it's not a requirement. So it's a huge challenge, by its very nature, when social studies was first created as a subject in the schools, it was supposed to be the place where children learned how to be participants in a democracy. So the fact that it's being squeezed out, it is definitely concerning. And we share JP's passion, and that's what we hope to do inside the Ed Center at the Alamo. We're gonna work with children as young as 3 and 4, early learners, to begin to build historical thinking skills in small children, to get them interested in learning about the past, because it begins with igniting a curiosity for how we got here. And I think that, you know, we may be biased, JP and I, that museums are sometimes uniquely positioned, because it can be more exciting than sitting in a classroom or reading a textbook, to actually come and see where these things happen. And in our view, that goes not just for the children, but for the teachers. So in addition to the programming that we intend to offer for children, we intend to offer really, really robust professional development for educators, so they can come during the summer, all expenses paid, spend a week with us at the Alamo alongside our historians, our archaeologists. We can take a Texas Revolution road trip, which, by the way, we're doing for the first time this April for a group of 15 teachers. Again, all expenses paid. We're going to take them to Goliad and San Felipe de Austin and over to San Jacinto, so they can be in the place where history happened, and then they can bring that excitement back to their classroom. So we think that it begins with the children, absolutely, and even small children, but we have to reach our teachers too.
That's so important. I think, you know, the thing about education is that you don't see the results for at least a generation. And so that, to me, that's why we're in this position that we're in right now, is because we think it happened, you know, we just woke up one day and everything was woke and crazy, but really it was a process of generational change that happens very slowly. So to that end, can you speak to the educational programs that you guys are doing to inform teachers and students specifically about these values and this history and their role and their place in it?
Absolutely. And, you know, first of all, I want to make sure that the audience understands what valiant defenders of the Texas identity these two are. I mean, JP took on essentially what was a civil war in academic history, and he just played it out all the way to its end. And, you know, for Kate, every time her alarm goes off at home and she gets ready for work, she looks over and it's 5:45 a.m., March 6th, 1836, you know, because it is Alamo Day every day. So, you know, these guys are actually putting their blood and treasure into this effort. So there is a genealogy of ideas, and you have to figure out where ideas start and how they flow, because these ideas end up becoming shapers of culture. So where does culture come from? Well, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Let's start there. So all the women in the room, y'all raise those kids. You start giving them the baseline, and then you hand them off to teachers. And those teachers were taught somewhere by somebody. And what you're starting to see in the United States is that there's about 9 graduate programs across the country that provide better than 80% of all the history faculty in PhD granting institutions across the country. So we have a very keen process of gatekeeping that is going on. And this was first brought to my attention when I was just a Kello youth in 1990. That may be a stretch, but I was in graduate school, and my major professor said, look, I want you to go through the directory of history, of departments of history that was put out by the American Historical Association. And you start to figure out, wait, Texas has just been colonized. And so you may get a PhD from UT or A&M, but you have to figure out, well, who were your major professors there, and where did they get trained? And so this is sort of like an oil and gas issue. You know, it's downstream or upstream issue. And you follow this upstream to the wellhead, you start to figure out, wait a second, this hasn't been by accident. 1990, my major professor said, here's how it lays out, go find it out for yourself. He didn't say, you must believe what I say, or you're no longer my graduate student. He said, you go investigate this, come back and tell me what you discovered. And what I discovered was, man, we're going to be in deep trouble in about 20, 30 years. Well, here we are. I mean, it was a very prescient conversation we had. So we've got to, all of us, everybody in the room, but our programs, need to do a couple of things. One is we have to compete. We have to get out there and compete because there's other people already in that K through 12 space, and they've been there for 30 years. And you're going to have to go in there and you're going to have to pry them out the hard way. This is trench warfare. And you're going to have to go trench by trench, dugout by dugout, and you're going to have to burn them out. And that's just what you got to do. Now, you're not going to always be successful. And you know what? I'm not always going to be right. My wife reminds me of that routinely. So even though that is the reality, we have to engage. We have sat on the sidelines. We've been on the sidelines for way too long. And as a result, while we were out, making our mortgages and having kids and raising families and having careers, there has been this steady march. And it's not make-believe. You can go and figure it out for yourself. The other thing that we have to do, the second point to that, is it helps if we cooperate and coordinate. The resources are too precious. Your donor resources, your philanthropy out there that's supporting Texas history education is too precious to have a whole lot of redundancy or things that clash and collide. So part of what I'm hoping to accomplish with the 1836 project is to actually let everybody else in the state know what everybody else in the state is doing. And if we can get some sort of cooperation going like that, I think that'll be extraordinarily productive. So that's kind of my perspective on it. But I'm amazed to be on this stage with these two people because they're the actual trench fighters. I get to be kind of above the fray and say lofty things, and then I throw a smoke grenade and I drive back to Kerrville and let them sort it out. So.
Mr. Bryan, really quick, we're about to get into our Q&A section, but I just wanted to ask you really quick, what do you think the one thing is that Texans and the people in this room should know about Texas but don't? If they're going to walk away with one thing today to share with their friends and families, what would the most important thing that they need to know about Texas be?
Well, I would say there's a whole lot about Texas history you don't know about that you would find inspiring, for sure. I wish I had one seminal thing I could tell you, but more importantly, I'd like to say in closing my remarks that for evil to succeed, all it takes is for good people to do nothing. And people in this room, no insult meant, have done too little too long. All of you need to get involved. In whatever way you think you're comfortable being involved. But we need your help. What the major institutions should be doing, we're now having to do it. And we're having to make up the difference and fill the gap. But we can't do it without your support. And I can tell you the things that we're doing at the TSHA. We're having a meeting with all the alliance or affiliated groups across the state of Texas to bring us all together and find out, let's speak with a common voice to this problem. Let's try to get the history departments rebalanced between liberal and conservative. I think that needs to be one of our most important initiatives ever. And I'm sure I'm going to get more of the same kind of commentary I received over the last year and a half from a certain group of people when I say that. But it needs to be there, and you all need to be a part of it. I'm not talking about defunding, but I'm saying, I'm not so happy about giving money any longer to this institution. If you can't bring balance to the history departments, then I don't want my culture, I don't want my history destroyed. And I think all of you need to become involved in any way you can. One little sidebar. So at the museum, we got children involved in writing the Guinness Book of Record largest book ever published. and we published it. 1,000 kids participated in the content of that book, and it's called I Am Texas.
That's awesome. And Dr. Rogers, we've got like 3 minutes, okay? But it's not just Texans who are in this fight. There is we have a British compadre joining this fight with us, okay? And some people may not be old enough to know who this is, but can you tell us really quick about a major supporter that you have at the Alamo?
Phil Collins, of course. And so a lot of folks are nodding their head. And yes, if you're too young to know who Genesis was, good for you. Yeah, and you know, that I think I'm glad you brought him up, because you asked what should people know. People should know, first and foremost, what we owe Mr. Collins is our gratitude. That he had amassed one of the, if not the preeminent collections of Texana, outside of Mr. Bryan's, of course. And he could have done a lot of things with it, but he chose to donate it because he wanted people to enjoy it. And he got a lot of flack over it. I came on board at the Alamo right when the book that shall not be named came out. And, you know, and then the excerpt from that book was printed in Texas Monthly, and I think it was hurtful to him. This was a personal passion of his that he spent his time and his money on, and again, he could have done a lot of things with that. And he just loves the Alamo. He grew up watching the television show as a child in the UK. He said, and while other kids were playing cowboys and Indians, he was playing the Texians and the Soldados. So and a coonskin cap. And so, you know, I would like for people to know that his collection, 438 objects, is a fine collection. The majority of the collection was paper. The paper all has excellent provenance. There were a few items that were attributed to specific individuals that cannot exactly be proven. It doesn't mean that it wasn't a musket or a bag of the type that would have been used during the Texas Revolution. It just means we can't say it was Steve Smith's bag. So, you know, I think it's unfortunate that people blew that out of proportion.
Yeah, they did. Let me add a little credibility to that and say that he outbid me time and again on.
Well, I'm sure you have a lot of questions after hearing from these 3, so we're going to go ahead and open it up to a Q&A. We have someone coming around with a microphone, so I'm just going to let you like find the people, and yeah, we'll do it that way.
Good morning. Thank you. Native Houstonian, live in San Antonio. Took my children to the Alamo last week for spring break. So
How was it?
We didn't go inside. I wanted them to see this. It was a little crowded and they're a little bit young, but I did take them to the IMAX, which was, I was like, we can't walk into this building. We got to set the stage. We got to set the story. And it's held the test of time pretty good, pretty well. I was reading, can you lead me through who has the authority for the books that are carried in some of our state historical site bookshops? I think there was a lengthy article that came out. There was some, I was just surprised at some of the titles that were carried there. It didn't seem congruous with trying to preserve our Texas history, and maybe it's one of those 36 committees, but if you could address that.
One about, are we talking about the books that were taken out of the plantation site? Yes. Well, yes. I mean, that was a very documented controversy. As a matter of fact, the person about whom the article was written is now suing Texas Monthly magazine for the commentary that was obviously a distortion of what was really what our opposition was to the literature, and it had nothing to do with books about slavery, and it was totally books not even related to anything that involved the plantation itself or the subject. So,
Well, all right, so the whole controversy, and I don't mean to walk over you, JP, but it had to do with a couple of plantation-related historic sites managed by THC. And what you run into a lot of times at historic sites all over the country is you look at the bookshelves and you're going, why are these books here? Now, in these particular historic sites, it dealt with the African-American story in Texas. But that literature is not as robust as it needs to be, frankly. And there were some sort of fill-in books. Well, I think there's a fundamental issue, too. Who's your book buyer? And a lot of times the book buyer is a 24-year-old fresh grad from fill in the blank. And they don't know what any of these books are about. And that's, we're kind of getting into a post-literate age here. And so then if you're the store manager, you've got to ask yourself, well, what moves the best at this site? At the Alamo, I predicted faux fur coonskin caps and not books. True. Yeah. I mean, hey, I used to run a store, museum store. I can tell you what did and did not move. And books are always kind of low on that food chain. So we're at an interesting nexus in our human journey in that books are no longer what they used to be. Book buyers are not as well prepared to be book buyers as they used to be, and by that I mean the store managers that are making the purchase. And so it's a combination of a lot of those things. But in essence, the argument was, hey, if you're going to have a historic site that tells the story of plantation slavery in Texas, then it probably shouldn't include books on Malcolm X or, radical black liberation movements, things like that. There's a place for that. There's a bookshelf somewhere that's begging for those books, but not necessarily at those plantation historic sites in the state of Texas. So.
Understand what you're talking about. We need to, as citizens, to get this information. It seems to me that, I don't know if it would have to be through State Board of Education or where this would come from, but just 1 year or half a year of history in our high schools is not enough. I think if we had history, say from the 6th grade through the 12th grade, Texas history for Texas, to go through the history there, and then after that, we have an idea of where we need to go for more history. But I think we're failing our students from elementary through high school on all history. And I think that's a good starting point. It used to be, but like you're saying, things are being changed so much, we're giving up on history, which is what the American citizens really need, I think. Do y'all have any way of knowing how to get that into schools?
Well, the State Board of Education we do have Texas history, both in the elementary grades and in the middle school. It would be something for you to contact your State Board of Education member about. They did undertake revision of the social studies standards a couple of years ago, and it was a train wreck. And so they decided at that time to put it off. They took on other education standards, and they will be coming back to it sooner rather than later. They have not said with House Bill 1605 what the order is going to be for the next set of standards to be updated, but social studies is definitely on the radar. It would be something to talk to your state board member about, and also, TEA does have email lists so that when these things are coming up and there are meetings happening, that people can go and testify in support of things like what you're talking about. So there's definitely a way to be engaged, and the state board members welcome engagement. They are volunteers. They have no staff, and a lot of times the things that are happening with the state board are happening just because they're sliding through the cracks, because these are all people with full-time jobs. And so any support that you would offer them, they would be more than welcome to take. I am confident of that. I don't know if y'all want to say anything else to that.
I quickly, what we're doing at TSHA, since we started this a year and a half ago when I arrived with the help of the staff, we're expanding our junior historian movement at every school that we can across the state of Texas. We'd like to see one at least in every county in the state, but they're wonderful because from 7th grade on through your high school experience, you're in the junior historian chapter that it goes out and examines places of historic interest across the state. You learn more about history. It's an ongoing education, and we do the same thing at the college level in the Web Society movement, so we're expanding those. At our museum, we're now sending exhibits out, traveling exhibits across the state to school districts. Our third exhibit's getting ready to go out next. It's going to be about Tejanos in Texas, and I was asked, could I tell everybody about Texas history that you probably don't know? What you probably don't know, what you ought to know, about the Tejano contribution to the Texas Revolution. We wouldn't have won without them. Just that simple. 9 of them died in the Alamo, never discussed. Wonder why? Because they were heroic figures. They weren't victims. They participated in the entire engagement from the very first battle of the Texas Revolution to the last one, and they came proportionally much greater than their population would have ever suggested. And but for Juan Seguin, we'd have never kicked Cost out of the Alamo in 1835. Just that simple.
I think the other thing that I would mention as it relates to the SBOE is that sometimes, your point is well taken, which is, you can't learn world history in 1 year in high school like that, and a teacher can't teach world history in 1 year in high school. That's impossible. So sometimes I think we get really myopic. We're looking at, well, how many times is this person mentioned in the textbook? And we're missing the forest for the trees, which is, if you want students to come out of their K-12 experience with a much deeper understanding of human history and where they came from, it's going to have to be much more pervasive than what it is today. It's just impossible.
It's like turning an oil tanker, too. I mean, it's a very wide radius, so.
Howdy, how are you over here? My wife and I were privileged to host a Texas Independence Day party, which was a big success, I think. And half the people there were non-natives. They didn't even know what we were celebrating. We told them. But the number one question I got after I told them about our history was what book they should read. They wanted a book recommendation, so I'd like to ask the panel, including the moderator, for your favorite Texas book. It could be your own. This is a good opportunity to pitch your own book if you're working on one. But I told him Fehrenbach, I told him McMurtry, but I would love your opinion on your favorite Texas book.
I'm looking to JP for this one.
I'm not going to touch that one. I got, there are just so many different books depending on if it's a biography of somebody or a battle or whatever. Fehrenbach, I think for just the person that's getting their first book on Texas, I'd recommend his book, Lone Star. I think it's a good beginning reader on Texas history for sure.
And the most recent is a big door stopper by Steve Harrigan called Big Wonderful Thing.
Yeah.
And he's a novelist.
It's 545 pages though, so
on 80-pound, cotton
It's also available on
content rag
Audible, though,
sheets,
if
too,
you'd rather
so-
listen to it in your car.
Yeah,
you
that's
can do
exactly how I did it as I'm traveling all across the state, listen to Steve. But it's a great, elegantly written book. But it's a lot.
And we're engaged in a new way to learn Texas history. It's called audio, and it's an app you'll put on your car, and as you drive through a town, it'll give you the history of all kinds of things involving that community. It's going to be a wonderful application. I would suggest all of you go online and figure out how to get your membership, because it's going to be a wonderful way to learn Texas history while you're driving across the state.
My favorite book is the Texas Travel Guide. because I take my kids on road trips every summer across Texas, and we visit every cemetery. I took them and we stood at the grave of Sam Houston, and I said, boys, we're standing 6 feet away from Sam Houston. And they were like, Mom, he's dead. But the Texas Travel Guide is amazing, and because every little town in Texas has something to offer people who travel through, and it's just, I mean, it's amazing, and we just check them off the list, and we go to every region. So that's my recommendation.
The other one that I would offer is Three Roads to the Alamo. So, and the reason I bring that book up is because I think JP said it best, which is the men inside the Alamo were not perfect. And scholarship has advanced over time. And I think Three Roads offers a very candid view of the big three, right? Bowie, Travis, and Crockett. And their strengths, their flaws as humans, but doesn't diminish their contribution to history. And I think that's kind of where we are in our country, that we can't, presentism is a very dangerous thing, applying today's values to men who lived 200 years ago. They were men of their time, and that's the reason I like that book.
It's dishonest.
It is
it is.
dishonest.
It's just flat dishonest.
Well, it makes them more interesting, too. I mean, because they're more realistic. You can identify with them. Oh, by the way, I would strongly recommend that you get a copy of the Almanac. Comes out every 2 years. I mean, it's got all kinds of information on almost everything Texas you can imagine. So it's a good book to have around just for reference.
I'm not sure I should bring this up, but I'm kind of curious. There was a lot of controversy with all the Alamo reimagination and
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, is it just me? The cenotaph and all that stuff. The Castro
say that
brothers.
word.
I'm just going to call them out. Are we past that now?
Yes, ma'am.
All
We
right.
are. I mean, yes, so much so that the plan that I mentioned earlier that made it to THC and then was declined at the Texas Historical Commission had multiple components to it that upset people. It called for lowering the grade of the site to its original grade, which would have been roughly 2 feet across the entire thing, which would have been tied up in archaeology till all of our grandchildren were, not around anymore. It wouldn't have allowed the fiesta parades, and for people not from San Antonio, that seems real weird, but fiesta is a very big thing in San Antonio, and the parade people were very upset because that's why they were created. They were going to tear down the buildings, but the most controversial thing was the movement of the cenotaph, and that's where it really imploded. And people felt strongly. The cenotaph is a memorial to the people who died there. And people felt strongly, they weren't moving it very far or proposing it to move it that far, but people felt strongly it shouldn't be moved from the place where the blood was spilled. Now, I'm not saying that there's not still, like I said earlier, there's still people who get upset about this little thing or that little thing. But broadly speaking, I mean, if you came to the Alamo tomorrow, you would see that we are on our way. There's construction everywhere, and while that's painful, it'll be worth it in the long run. And we're restoring a sense of reverence and respect to the site. Ultimately, that's what we're doing. No more cars honking their horns in front of the Alamo and all that stuff.
We've
Okay.
got about 5 minutes.
Let me just say one quick thing about the job this woman's done. I mean, I have watched the opposition, and I saw the original effort and was on that committee. Brilliant. I mean, to have the diplomatic skills it took to get all this resolved appropriately is amazing. And the benefit to Texans is going to go on forever. I mean, people come from all over the world to go to the Alamo. And they come to Texas to go to the Alamo. And I will assure you the experience that they're going to get when you finish that project is going to be nothing but amazing. And it's going to make a lot of people that are trying to sort of change the vernacular around our history, it's going to be an embarrassment to them in terms of the quality of what's on display there.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Are there any resources for parents or teachers to know which books are telling the truth. You know, we've grown up for a long time that people my age don't even look at history the way the young people do because they haven't heard that. And where is the truth to be found? You know, what can a parent or a teacher do to make sure that they are not saying the wrong things?
I'll throw myself on the grenade to save the squad. So ultimately, this is all about civic virtue. Ultimately, you know, everybody in here has agency, and they have to have a discerning mind about what rings true, what does not ring true. So there is no sort of single clearinghouse where you can go and say, oh, that's a green checkmark book as opposed to a red X book. But you need to know who the authors are, what their training was, you know, what angle they're coming at it from. And you need to read a lot of different books on the same topic. And that seems like an awful lot of investment, but if it's worth knowing, then it's worth knowing well. And the thing that struck me about Phil Collins, I had a chance to spend a week in Phil Collins' basement, which is really weird when I say it out loud. But one of the things that was really cool about hanging with him is that he read it all. The good, the bad, the indifferent, the factual, the counterfactual. He read it all. And he was kind of the quintessential gentleman English scholar, you know, with a stack of books near his armchair. And unfortunately, knowing stuff and getting to historical truth requires an investment of time and energy. History doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. But increasingly, we are a bumper sticker society. And that's what people in this country, and that's what people well over the horizon in other countries want to turn us into, is somebody that can only consume history in, you know, 6 or 7 word blocks. So, no, that heavy lift is up to you. And that heavy lift is up to me. It's up to all of y'all. There's no way to shortcut this. That's why I'm saying this is trench warfare.
I think we've got time for one more.
Real quick before I get to my question, when we're talking about highlighting both the good and the bad aspects of Texas history, my own personal opinion, I think Lyndon Johnson ought to be taught as a cautionary example, both nationally and especially in Texas. And if we were to have a proper understanding of him, we would be in a very different place. My question for the panel, for anyone who wants to take it, if you were to be asked to design a Mount Rushmore of Texas, what would be the 4 names you would put on it?
We've already heard some fangirl votes for Sam Houston up here.
I would definitely put the Dr. Pepper on the... Everybody that works with me knows it's 3 Dr. Peppers a day at 10, 2, and 4.
Yeah, 10, 2, and 4. I think that there's probably a pantheon of Texas heroes. And a lot of different places have tried to do that. I mean, there's a pantheon of Italian heroes in Florence, for instance. What I have discovered from writing 250 5-minute scripts is that you're going to need a bigger mountain. Rushmore ain't going to handle it. So if you could find somebody that would sell you the entire Delaware range out in West Texas, you might be able to get them all on there. But the true heroes of this state are you guys. I mean, it's the character that you guys bring into the fight every day. Sam Houston is a representative sample. You know, so are other people. You know, so is Barbara Jordan. In his own way, LBJ. I mean, you don't have to like them all. But they all had this one sort of unifying spirit that was Texan. And as a result, I think that everybody gets to carve their name on that imaginary Texas Mount Rushmore.
You know, Borglum tried to do a Mount Rushmore in Texas on the Rio Grande.
Oh, right.
Yeah, right at the mouth of Borquillas Canyon. He came, stayed at the Gage Hotel, and went down there with all his complement and tried to figure out whose picture there or whose monument, whose face was going to be on the monument. But you know, the thing about Texas I find amazing, there's so many more stories left to be told. There's so many invisible heroes that made our history. It's such an incredible tapestry that we can't just turn this over to just one vernacular. There are many different kinds of inspiring and interesting stories that need to be told about Texas. And I just hope all of you will go out and encourage to see that happens, and let's do our best to protect and promote the greatest history of any state in the Union. Thank
Dr.
you.
Rogers, is there something you wanted to say? I'll give you the final word.
The only thing I was going to say is I agree with JP wholeheartedly. If I was going to do a Mount Rushmore, I'd pick 4 or 5 people you never heard of, but contributed significantly to our history. And that's what we're committed to doing, which is bringing forward the stories of people who made a huge impact. And JP mentioned the Tejanos inside the Alamo, right? Toribio Lozoya was the only Alamo defender who was born there and died there. But most folks have no idea who that is. Clara Driscoll. We wouldn't have an Alamo if it wasn't for Clara Driscoll, and a lot of people don't know her impact on Texas history. So I'd pick 4 people you never heard of, and that's who I'd put up there. Because I think what JP said is the best. History is a lifelong journey. You know, I learned something new every day at the Alamo, which is what makes it so much fun to get to work there, something I didn't know. And I think the best we could do for our students, to go back to the question that you asked, and us as citizens, is to get people curious and wanting and desiring to know more and to learn more so that they become students of history for their entire lives.
Well, I just want to thank you so much. I enjoyed so much preparing for this, watching all of your videos, reading all of your articles, and they have a ton of information online, each and every one of these panelists, so I'd encourage you to go and look them up.